Yeah, for break. Before Thanksgiving. Okay. Cool, thank you.
How much time is you want to talk about? What do you want to say? Just approve. Can I just send you an email and say here's some time slots?
Yes.
Time is much better.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll get the first one.
They won't even heard. Yeah. I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah.
So.
You all like to be so proud.
Baby stole her.
Your turn, sir.
Good evening and welcome to the October meeting of the Granville Schools Board of Education. If you would please rise and join me in the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for joining this evening. Just wanted to mention up front, you notice our colleague Ron O'Day can't be here due to a personal conflict this evening, and even Jeff Brown cannot stop the problems of the transportation industry and is delayed by a flight. We're not sure if he'll even make it here or not, but flight delays and things are a fact of life these days, so we'll apologize in advance if he can't make it here, but we've got the capable hands of Mr. Burnett stepping in for him. So if you'd call roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Deeds? Here. Ms. Shaw? Here.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
I don't think there's any changes tonight, so.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Which brings us to one of my favorite parts of the agenda, which is the commendations. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to honor 5 students to start off this evening. Students entered the National Merit Scholarship Program by taking the 2021 PSAT test offered in October of 2021. In April, National Merit identified the 50,000 highest scorers worldwide. Some 16,000 of those high performers were recently designated as semifinalists on a state representational basis. Semifinalists now have the opportunity to continue the merit scholarship competition and advance to finalist standing by meeting a number of additional requirements. The other 34,000 high performers nationally are commended scholars based on a national selection index of 207. Tonight we have the opportunity to offer our congratulations and commendations to the following students. Semifinalists for the Granville School District are Andrew Harms and Xander Dalkey. And commended scholars Stephen Zerwick, Owen Garman, and Brian Harms. If you're present, why don't you come up here, and we'd love to recognize you. As a former high school principal, I can tell you that's one of the highest honors that a high school student can achieve, and all 5 of you are to be commended. Congratulations. Next, we'd like to recognize our treasurer and her department as they were recently awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021 by the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, or GFOA. The report was judged by an impartial panel to meet the high standards of the program, which included demonstrating a constructive spirit of full disclosure to clearly communicate its financial story and motivate potential users and user groups to read the report. The Certificate of Achievement is the highest form of recognition in the area of governmental accounting and financial reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by a government and its management. So in other words, this is Brittany's state report card, and she got a 5-star. Congratulations to our treasurer, Brittany Triola, and her staff. And that's all for our accommodations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bernath. And Mrs. Trillo and maybe Mr. Bernath are going to chip in on some staff reports. First, we'll have the financial report, followed by some more information about strategic planning updates recently in the Levy.
Thank you.
That's a little much for me. Let's switch. Yeah, there you go. 2 minutes. That's
Oh, that's good.
still a little big.
All right, so first we are going to start with the September monthly financial report. So the first graph here shows our cash balance by month for this fiscal year, actuals for July through September, and then projected for October through June compared to where we were last year. And for the month of September, we are up about $4.7 million from where we were last year. And that's largely due to the carryover cash balance that we had at the end of last fiscal year. We are still in the upward trend of the levy cycle. As you know, our cash balance varies not only month from month, which you can see here, but also year to year as new levies are phased in, because our revenue doesn't exactly equal and offset our expenditures in any given year. So that is what is causing the increase in cash balance from last year to this year.
Is that about a $7 million difference, kind of high and low? Is that pretty typical throughout the course of the year?
Yeah, that is about right, and this is the typical trend that we see. So the income tax has actually helped reduce a little bit of the degrees in which we see highs and lows throughout the year, because The income tax is received in 4 payments throughout the year, so it does help to kind of create a little bit less difference from month to month. But yes, this is a very typical trend that you would see largely due to real estate payments coming in twice a year. So it really draws the balance up in August when we receive the settlement, and then again in March. So looking at revenue, just for the month of September, we did not have a real estate payment this month or income tax, so not anything to report on the local tax side. State revenue is up slightly, and that's really a lot to do with the timing of when the state funding formula was implemented last year compared to this year. So then looking at the revenue year to date compared to last year, local taxes are up about $380,000, and that's mostly the income tax payment for July. We'll receive our next payment then in October, so we'll see how that turns out. But we have seen a slight increase there. Again, same factor at play on the state revenue side. That's really a timing difference. And then all other revenue, this $807,000, that's really just an accounting adjustment that we have that's larger this year compared to last year due to our ESSER funds. So that's the return of advance payment that we've talked about in the past. On the expenditure side, just
Real quick, that did return of advance. We advanced ourselves funds to the operating.
yep. So how that
We grew funds from the operating thing to cover the expenses of the assessor, and then we get paid back for it.
Yeah, so the way that all of our federal grants work are reimbursement based. So we have to spend them and then request reimbursement through the state. So that those funds do not end in a negative cash status at the end of each fiscal year. We advance from the operating fund to the grant funds and then return it once we're into the new fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
So on the expenditure side for the month of September, salary and benefits are up just slightly. And I'll show you on the year to date, you can see a little bit better, but that's largely due to the base salary increases and steps. But we've also added 2 positions at the elementary level due to enrollment growth. So that is causing an increase in that line item. Purchase service, this is always up and down from month to month, just due to timing. And then all other expenses includes supplies, but also this year we have some capital expenditures in that line item due to the HVAC projects at the elementary and the high school. We covered a large portion of that with ESSER funds, but there was a portion that is in the operating budget. So basically same items on the year to date, but the numbers are a little bit bigger, so you can see what that looks like on an annualized basis so far. So almost $400,000 in salary and benefits, and then $287,000 in all their expenditures, again, related to HVAC. And then we also have some software material purchases that we have added this year due to cyber security and maintaining that insurance coverage.
And the purchase services is just timing, you said?
Yeah, that's largely due to timing. When those payments come in, it can vary significantly from year to year. So that will likely even out as we move throughout the year. Then moving on to our ESSER and other COVID-related funding. So again, we are restricted in how we can use these funds. So I will show a slide here in a minute that shows exactly how all of our funds are spent. These 4 categories are just those 4 sources which we have left to spend. And how we are spending the funds that we have remaining are shown down here. So we have staffing. That is going to be for summer intervention. Next summer, we have staffing at the elementary for an intervention position for reading and math. We have behavior specialists out of the IDEA portion, and then the rest of the HVAC project at the elementary. So we are really utilizing those dollars as best we can and trying to spend those before we hit the general operating fund. So we're trying to spend as invoices come in for that project, trying to hit the grant fund first. So we're utilizing those federal funds first.
It's about 2.5 to 3 million total at the bottom?
Yes, this is just the 4 sources that are left,
Oh.
but in total, yes. So this graph here just shows how much we have left to spend of those 4 sources. The orange is the remaining balance, the blue is what we have already spent. So you're seeing we are spending that down pretty quickly. And then this graph here shows this is all of our sources, so including those that we've already fully expended, this is how we spent all of our ESSER funds. So a lot of it, especially right at the beginning, was cleaning supplies, PPE, plexiglass. We did originally have an allocation in here for an additional custodian that our contractor was not able to fill, so we did use some of the funds we paid bus drivers to come in and do some cleaning during the day, so that's under staffing. And then as I talked about, we had intervention, summer, during the day, we have summer intervention. We were also able to purchase some furniture for classrooms to better utilize the space for social distancing, some credit recovery, and then a large portion was facility improvements, so the HVAC that I already talked about, as well as flooring, so replacing carpet with Forbo to allow for ease of cleaning the spaces a little bit better. So that is how we spent all of the ESSER and COVID-related funds.
God, that's the first I've heard of the bus drivers actually working in maintenance and cleaning and things like that, and I know it's hard enough to find bus drivers, but if you would specifically express our thanks for them helping out in all those capacities, that'd be great. It's hard enough to find people these days for both of those schools, and it's great that we've got some people that are dedicated enough to do that.
Thank
Pass
you.
that along, thanks.
Okay, and then that brings us to our cash reconciliation, and that wraps up the monthly financial report. So if there's no other questions on that, I will transition into our next presentation.
Anything on the monthly report? No, that's great, thanks.
Okay, so transitioning then into a little bit of an income tax update. So I just wanted to first start off with this graph that we've seen. This is a snapshot from the May 5-year forecast, and this is showing the next 4 years of projected revenue represented by the dark blue bars, and then expenditure, the light gray bars. With the top of each revenue bar, that little section there that's growing as we get out to 2026, that represents the income tax renewal. So then the 2 lines here, we have our cash balance with the levy renewal, so that's represented by the green line, and then the cash balance without the levy renewal represented by the red line. And why this is so powerful is because it's really showing the difference in the cash balance and how quickly the cash balance will decline without the income tax renewal. So keep that in mind as we work through this presentation. When Ryan gets into the conversation about growth and strategic planning, that's why this slide is important.
There's a lot in that slide, right? So the gray part at the top of the dark blue looks like the income tax is sort of like increasing from 1 year to year, but in reality it's just that's when we collect it, because you only collect half a year in 2025 or something, is that?
Yeah, so
correct?
the reason why the bar gets greater in each of those 3 years is because of the phase out. So if you remember when the income levy first was passed, and I would talk about, we're still phasing in, we're still building up, that would phase out at the same rate that it phased in. Because of when the tax filing deadlines are, and people requesting extensions and delinquent payments and things like that, it would trickle in. So it would be a phase out process just like it phased in.
And the light blue bars on the right there show inflationary growth and enrollment growth expenses, is that right?
Yeah, so this, from the May forecast, we did not include any, what I would say, significant projections related necessarily to Intel. So this is just carrying forward our historical trends as far as expenditure assumptions goes. So yes, inflationary increases, as well as what we would typically project in terms of enrollment growth, adding incremental staff each year. That is what we have included in the assumptions on the expenditure side.
And so we've got a strategic task force composed of a number of people and the consultant that we hired to look at enrollment growth over time. Will those be rolled into next year's forecast, though, when we get around to that and kind of come to consensus with the committee about what the enrollment growth should be?
Yeah, so the way that the timing of the forecast works, so we'll have another revision of the forecast coming up here in November. And I'm not sure that it's going to make sense or that we're going to have enough time to really dig into the cooperative strategies projections and decide exactly how we want that to look for the November revision. But we submit the five-year forecast twice a year in May and November, so we have the flexibility to either put those assumptions in what we think we want it to look like in November or wait and do that in May. The other thing too is that the forecast, while it is formally submitted and approved by the board and submitted to ODE, we go through that formal process. We have this forecasting software that we can always use to run different scenarios. So we can plug in different assumptions and see the impact. So just because we pick one scenario or another to submit for the forecast doesn't mean that's what it's going to be. In fact, we're most likely going to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
It is a projection. But just knowing that we have the flexibility and capability to adapt and plug in those scenarios will be helpful along the way.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions in there.
Yes.
Yeah, great, thank you.
So the next two graphs here represent our total operating revenue and then total expenditures. And the takeaway here is showing that the income tax represents nearly 20% of our total operating revenue. And the reason for that is that it's grown over time. So the income tax adjusts with the economic conditions of the community. Unlike property tax, which is the 58%, which does not grow over time. We see a small portion of growth on the inside millage, but that's a very small portion of the total millage, so we do not see growth there. Then the 17%, that is state funding, which we're never going to see more funding from the state. So
It's a pretty firm prediction there.
no matter what formula we're going to have, whether that be flat funding or some formula based on property values and income, Greenville is going to be seen as a wealthy district by whatever formula the state comes up with. So we cannot count on that slice of the pie to grow. That's why the 20% portion with the income tax is vital to stable funding into the future. Then on the expenditure side, 77% of the total expenditures are staff salary and benefits. So what does that mean? That means without 20% of our revenue, if the income tax were to not be renewed, it would impact staffing, which impacts kids, impacts the educational process. So there's no way that we could cut 20% of our budget without impacting staffing. That's why that is such an important piece of this equation, so that we can maintain staffing into the future and be able to adapt as we grow and change over time. Okay, so next I want to get into a little bit more on the property tax rates and this concept of reappraisal. So this is kind of deep stuff, so hang with me here and ask questions as you need to. So what I have shown is the voted rate of each levy, each property tax levy, the year it was passed, and the term. So continuing or whether it's for a fixed year. So the first thing I want to point out is that all of our operating levies are for a continuing period of time. So what does that mean? That means permanent, but the language used by the state, used by the Board of Elections is continuing. That is the terminology used. So that is not out of the norm for Granville, as you can see here. The next piece is the reduction factor. So as property values increase due to reappraisal, tax rates are adjusted down. So that means that the district does not collect anything additional in terms of revenue. That means also as an individual, as your property value goes up due to reappraisal, the tax rates are adjusted down. So you're not going to pay more as an individual either. You may see individual fluctuations in your tax bill if your value goes up at a greater rate than your neighbor, But if everybody across the board receives the same inflationary adjustment, your tax bill will not increase on the school portion. There are other portions of your bill that may increase, but this reduction factor only applies to schools. So if we take this operating levy that was effective in 1976, so that's been quite some time, so surely property values have increased significantly since 1976. The original voted rate was 22.9 mils. The Class 1 effective rate, which Class 1 is for residential and agriculture, is now at 3.7 mils. So you can really see where, as values have gone up over the last 50 years, the tax rate has adjusted down significantly to accommodate that growth in value. Why is that important? Because we're going into an update year where we're expecting 25 to 35% increase in values. But what is important takeaway from this is that the district will not see an increase of 25 to 35% in revenue. We will only see an increase on the inside millage, the 2.45 mils in operating, and the 2.75 mils in permanent improvement. And then same thing on the Class 2, but that is for commercial and industrial. However, Granville is heavily reliant on the Class 1. So we're about 90-10 split, whereas the state average is 75-25. So that is why the Granville schools are so heavily reliant on individual taxpayers, is this concept right here. So what questions do you have on this side? Anybody?
So this might be obvious, but my taxes will not necessarily go up as my house is reappraised at a higher value. However, I can sell it for more.
Yes.
Okay. And, okay. That's it. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. Okay.
This is interesting to see it this way, right? And the first time I've kind of looked at, well, that's like on our tax bills, right? You can find that on the website, right? So since 1976, we've had 9 property tax levies, all of which were permanent or continuing, right? And so it's like every 4 years, because it's like 10 years, it's like 40 years there. So it's like every 4 years, you'll have a property tax levy. And it also looks like more when there's more inflation. Like, it's interesting, at 76 and 77, which were like super high inflationary times, right? Inflation was through the roof in the 70s like that. You had more levies.
Yeah, and if you think about that, it makes sense, right? Because our expenditures as a district are going to increase with inflation, because we are impacted heavily by inflation, as well as everyone.
Yeah.
But our revenue doesn't adjust accordingly. So in times of high inflation, it makes sense that we would need to pass levies more frequently. Property tax levies more frequently, because they don't account for inflation.
So the problem in 2000 was to build the intermediate school?
Yep.
And we did, I mean, if you look after 2015, 5 years after that, would have been like roughly 4 or 5 years is when we passed the income tax.
Yep.
So that kind of took the place of one of the property tax increases. And actually at the time when we passed the income tax, we removed we did not allow to renew one of the property taxes.
Right.
As a part of that transaction.
Yep. So as a part of the income tax passage in 2018, we had a 1.7 mil permanent improvement levy that was for a 5-year term. But again, that's permanent improvement, not operating. But we did allow that to expire. And so to create a funding source for the permanent improvement fund so that we could maintain our capital assets, our buildings, we moved a portion of the inside millage from operating to the permanent improvement. So that is another reason why it's important to have the income tax as part of the operating revenue, because we did take a portion of that one piece that does grow with inflation on the property tax side, and it's now in permanent improvement.
Right.
So the income tax can help offset that as well.
So I don't know enough about bonds, but why were the years, the 28 years, the 5 years, the 7 years, why were those numbers given as numbers for?
So typically with a bond issue, the highest you can do is 28 years. It has to do with the useful life of the building. So they're not going to issue debt for a period of time that's greater than the useful life of the asset that you're issuing debt on. So it's a judgment call basically when you're issuing debt, whether you do 27, 28, around there is pretty common. So that's just how it was set up at that time.
Like a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
Like a 30-year mortgage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does the reevaluation affect new build?
So that is a good question, because that is another place that I forgot to mention that we do see growth. So new construction does create additional revenue for the district. So that does not impact the reduction. So if we have new construction, that will not reduce our rates. So if the total value in the district goes up because we had $5 million in new construction, we will see the additional revenue on that $5 million. Good question.
And the additional students.
I was just going to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if it's commercial, then we will
That's a
see,
big
so
one.
that's another good point that I will mention too while we're talking about this is $5 million in residential new construction would generate, $5 million times whatever we add up these total millage applied. However, $5 million in new commercial construction, you apply the class 2 rates, which you can see are higher. So $5 million in new commercial construction not only generates more revenue because the tax rates are higher, but you also don't have the expenses associated.
That's great. That's a nice way to see it. And there's a lot that's in here. If anybody has questions, print these. And email address and phone number are on the web.
Yes, please feel free to reach out anytime, stop by. Okay, next, I wanted to show the ballot language. So on the left, I have a screenshot from the Ohio Revised Code, section 5748.03. So this is the ballot form for a school district income tax. And then on the right, I have a screenshot from the Licking County Board of Elections sample ballot language that you will actually see when voting. Just so that we can kind of clarify where did all this terminology come from, because we've been getting a lot of questions about that and there's some confusion. So to clarify, if this levy were to be proposed for a specific number of years, we would state, as it says here, state the specific number of years. However, the board made the decision for this to be continuing. So that is the language that we are required, we have no flexibility in, we are required to say a continuing period of time, which does mean permanent, but that is the official ballot language. And then as far as the renewal language, that is covered in section 2 of this code. It says to renew an income tax expiring at the end of. That is the additional language inserted into the ballot language. So you can see that section is right there. And this is to renew the income tax, which is expiring at the end of 2023. That's why you don't see it phasing out when we looked at this chart until, not even starting until 2024. So this is our earliest eligibility to place this on the ballot for renewal. However, we felt it was prudent to do that as soon as possible so that we're not faced with a situation next fall where we're facing significant cuts if it doesn't pass, that kind of thing. So that is why we are going for this now prior to its expiration in December of 2023.
But it still wouldn't start to be collected until 2024.
Correct.
April.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's clear. I mean, I think there was some confusion about the language and the wording and things like that, but in reality, we had no input on this one. Right, there's no choice about the wording and language we can use, so I appreciate that.
Yep. So the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Ryan is I do have a page on the district website under Treasurer for Income Tax Resources. So so the school district does not handle the collection of the income tax itself. That is all handled through the Ohio Department of Taxation. So I have linked documents from the Department of Taxation that talks about what kind of income is included or excluded from this. This is a traditional income tax, so it is all income. However, it does exclude Social Security and certain other types of income. So there's lots of resources out there on our website, linked from the Department of Taxation. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you.
So Levy, we cannot have a financial discussion or a conversation about our future. We're talking about Intel and plans for that. And so we have an update along with an update from our work with cooperative strategies on some of the data that we're using to see how all this growth might impact our schools and our community. The first thing is something new that we want to make sure we share with the community. The TJ Evans Foundation and Planet Next have a survey that's available. It's available on the QR code, and we'll make sure that we communicate that on our website and through different district communications as well. But basically, this framework is the combination of 15 different jurisdictions within Lincoln County all along the 16 corridors. So this is some municipalities, cities, towns, townships, working together with an eye towards Lincoln County as a whole. So if you would like to provide some input, and I think the more input that we can provide that will impact our voice for our community and our school district, that is only going to benefit our students and our community in the long run. So they're starting with a survey, and they're having consultants work on this particular survey, but it does represent the entire Lincoln County 16 corridor in that process. We want to make sure we share that with everyone.
I can't express enough how thankful I am to the Evans Foundation for doing this, right? You think about a lot of places that have gone through significant growth, and if you don't have like an overarching strategy for traffic and development and where businesses located, things like that, you just get nasty sprawl, right? And you get kind of competition between adjacent, districts or towns or things like that about what kind of development's going to happen. And so it's great that they stepped in and they realized there was an opportunity here, right, to think very broadly. So I really would encourage everybody to go and fill out their survey, right, give them your perspective on the values of your community, what you'd like to see out of this growth, because the growth is really going to happen. There's no question the growth is going to happen. And having an umbrella organization thinking deeply, and who has a lot of consultants, and the Evans Foundation has committed a lot of financial resources to think about this as a community-wide effort, right? It's not just Granville, it's not just, St. Albans Township, there's lots of places that have lots of development, and I think this kind of umbrella organization is really critical. And I will say also, our school districts are working together in a way now that we haven't in the past. Part of it was actually driven by COVID, right? The last 2 or 3 years forced the school districts to work with each other because we were just trying to interpret the rules and the laws and the health department guidelines and things. So the superintendents have formed a great group. The treasurers are collaborating now more closely. And I think that kind of collaboration is really going to drive success in thinking broadly about, what's the right thing. Well, you got it? Sounds good.
This is the end of my shortest lived superintendent.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
You may continue, Mr. Graff.
I didn't mention earlier, the QR code's here, but there's also a website, frameworklc.org, that you can visit as well and get access to that particular survey. So the next piece of this is our work with cooperative strategies. Remember the last board meeting that we had, we talked about the kindergarten numbers and how those were significantly different. First of all, our next task force meeting is October 25th, so that's in the works and planned, and we have a lot of data to start digging through our work with cooperative strategies. But one of the things that they did was they looked at, why is this kindergarten enrollment that we projected at 140 plus students end up being 180 plus students? What is that anomaly? Was it due to the sale of homes and students moving in? And they collected a lot more data specifically for that specific class because it was an anomaly. And we have anomalies like that from time to time. For example, last year, 6th grade is a perfect example. I think we had 24 or 23 new students in 6th grade alone last year. And if you added up 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade combined, I don't know if we had 23 or 24 new students. But that was just an outlier. One of the things that we need to make sure is this kindergarten growth that we're seeing, was that a anomaly, a partial anomaly, or is it indicative of more significant growth that's coming this way with families with younger children moving into the district? So with that follow-up information, they've come up with a new draft, and what you see here are the likelihoods of enrollment from low to high over the course of the next 7 or 8 years. So obviously this is the lowest growth, and that would probably be like without Intel, where we would expect growth to be. And then you have different varying measures of what Intel and companies relocating to the area, the need for more workers, which means the need for more homes, which means more people moving into the district, and different likelihoods of these particular things happening. One of the things that the task force will start to sort through is which of these scenarios is most likely, in having those conversations. And obviously lots of board discussion on that over the next 2 years.
Yeah, so historically, we've had 20 or 30 new construction home builds per year, something along those lines.
Yeah, if you remember that chart that Brittany showed the last meeting, obviously there were a couple of years where there were in the hundreds or,
with park
almost
trails
100
and things
park
like
trails,
that. and so
yes,
forth.
correct.
So do you know which one, is there a rough number of houses per year or things like that with these? I thought it was like a 20, 40, and a 60 houses per
Yeah,
year.
so there are two different methodologies. This is looking at historical enrollment. That's looking at housing yield and potential, student potential. So in those models where they collide is where you try and make the recommendation.
Right.
So based on what you see from a housing perspective and historical, combined to give you what you recommend as what you should plan for.
Okay. Yeah, so this strategic task force is really a fantastic resource for our community. There's, real estate people and financial advisors and community development people and people that have seen this before, that really the job of that task force is to come back to the Board of Education with a recommendation of like, this is where we think your growth is going to be, and some recommendations around what that means for building capacity and what that means for financing and so forth. So I guess we've always kind of known we're growing, right? It's Granville, an attractive community, and we always have home builds and things like that. It's only going to be more than that, right, with the pressures of development that's coming our way and so forth. So that will drive one of these other curves. And so we'll have those recommendations back from the task force in the spring.
And I think one of the things that we're also doing is working with cooperative strategies for the next 3 years so that we can refine the data and the trend.
Okay.
But the low looks like growth is declining, so is that even necessary to?
So let me share with you why those are typically on the graph at all.
Okay.
Recessions. Those types of things that, are maybe more of an anomaly, could take a trend line and turn it down. So if we see a major recession and things gum up from an economy standpoint, you can see a low trend.
Okay, thank you.
And, we saw this little uptick that you see, even this year going, from a post-COVID, we expected to increase enrollment a little bit, just from families returning to school that decided to stay home for a year and so forth. We're over 2,600 students ADM right now, which we've never been. So at least in my tenure, we've never been. So that's significant, and that's not just the kindergarten, it's really seen at all levels.
Yeah. And actually, you can see like from 2012 to 2013, 2014, the first 3 years of this or whatever, the enrollment went down,
Yeah.
right? Because there's like bubble classes.
Yes.
There's some classes that just have more kids, and you have more kids graduating than you come in kindergarten, and your number might go down.
So along those same lines, the next slide is really just a numerical representation of that particular graph. One of the things I want to point out, I know we've talked about the kindergarten class was 180 plus, and you'll notice up here that the kindergarten number that they start with is 165. And that frankly is really just a conservative approach to not knowing, is that 40 all due to growth, or is that just a one-year anomaly like our 6th grade? So it's an easy way to not overestimate what our growth is going to be until we collect more data. And the board has entered into agreements and given us permission to enter agreement with cooperative strategies for 3 years. So we'll be able to see over the next 3 years our kindergarten numbers historically bigger and bigger than we've ever projected based on birth rates and things like that we collect. So we'll have a much better idea if 2022-23 kindergarten is an anomaly, or is that the new norm? You can't base that on 1 year. So they bumped it up a little bit because there is some growth obviously in there. But at the same time, they didn't go to the full 185. Even with that, with normal growth patterns and a relatively moderate amount of growth, that kindergarten class that's 165 in 2023 will be at 260 when they enter high school. Our largest class that I can remember at Granville High School was 235 when they graduated. So just to kind of give you a frame of reference, these things matter as you start thinking about limitations with space. I know the middle school and high school where we have the most space right now, these students will also be going to the elementary and intermediate school where we have the least space in terms of growth. Thinking about if we have to have new construction, the acquisition of land is really important because that land is going to disappear very rapidly in a high growth environment. Do we have the funds on hand to available to purchase that land in advance, because construction of a school building does not happen overnight. And so all those things play into, going back to this previous slide, which of these growth paths are the ones that we're going to base our planning on, and then based on that and these numbers that we see here, how do we get to make sure that we have the right staffing in place, the right facilities in place, so that we continue the great education that we give our students here in Granville schools.
I should have stayed in LA. Well done, Ryan.
So the last piece of this that we wanted to mention are the role of the superintendent committee. So we do have 6 standing superintendent committees that are authorized by the Board of Education. You can see that they're listed there. These are stakeholder engagement groups, and they're usually, they are run by a staff member. For example, I run the World Class Education Committee. Each one of these committees has different responsibilities that they look at and provide advisory comments to the members of the administration who run those particular groups, who would then bring them to the superintendent and ultimately the Board of Education. There's also other task force, like the Intel Task Force, that kind of rise up when there's maybe shorter term or more frequent, not more frequent, but more urgent issues, but may not be ongoing. We want to provide a world-class education all the time. We want to develop the whole child all the time. Those are ongoing. I don't know if Intel will still be a conversation in 20 years. It may or may not be. We don't know the answer to that yet. That may become permanent at some point. So, but right now it's just an urgent task force that has a lot of data to sift through.
Yeah, that's great. And the thing about these 6 different committees is we're just so fortunate in Granville to have really high caliber people, right? When you talk about like operations and resources, we have people in the community that manage major operations of big corporations. We have people that understand, maintenance of things. So this committee gets together. And this is the time when a lot of people are thinking about the schools. So we're putting these 6 things out here as an invitation, right? If you have any expertise in finance, we'd love to have you on the finance committee. If you're really passionate about the curriculum and education we do, the World Class Education Committee is a fantastic resource to really kind of see and give advice to the district about what's happening and so forth. So again, to anybody that's in the community, we welcome your input on any of these committees.
And if you're interested, contact Janelle King, just call the district office, and she'll put you in contact with the member of the administration that runs the team.
Yep.
Short, quick plug, World Class Ed committee meeting is Wednesday night at 6:30.
Great.
So the crew questions, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for those kind of clarifications and things. And I'm sure Jeff wants to have the last word. Anything else from you on some of those?
Look
Look at that.
Yeah, I will not exercise the last word. If you wanted to make a comment, you just had a recent finance committee.
Yes.
And I actually did most of the presenting because it was related to growth.
Yeah, and any members of the board that want to chime in too on the finance committee. So we met last week to basically do a high-level presentation of the cooperative strategy presentation in the context and with a financial lens, I would say. And finance committee is, I think the invitation goes out to 24, 25 people, community members, board members, staff. And so the committee ends up being those individuals who are present for the discussion, but we do also correspond with individuals who aren't necessarily able to make it to the meetings as well, in between meetings, or just as their schedules allow. So the meeting that we had back in May was I think, almost 100% different group of people than we had last week. So it really varies in those opinions that are shared, that we're able to hear from, depends on who's present.
And sometimes the committees meet virtually and so forth, and I'd like to encourage us, that's maybe one thing that came out of the COVID experience, is that we all seem to know how to use video cameras better now, although there's always challenges with each new platform and microphones and so forth. So I'd like to encourage maybe to kind of continue to find ways every other time or something to do it virtually for people that can't get here in person and so forth, because they're really valuable. Good, well that's some of the staff reports. We've reached the time in our agenda where we welcome public comments. Anyone that wishes to share a message with the Board of Education, please feel free to step to the microphone, state your name and address, and speak for up to 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Greg Lott. I live at 123 Wildwood Drive here in Granville. I'm here tonight representing the Board of Trustees for the Granville Recreation District. We met recently and we passed a resolution that wanted to come here tonight and share and make part of the official record. So the Granville Recreation District recognized the Granville Exempted Village School District as a strategic partner. The Granville Recreation District recognizes the Granville Exempted Village School District provides programming space to the Granville Recreation District as an in-kind support via our collaborative relationship. The Granville Recreation District recognizes the Granville Exempted Village School District as a prudent overseer of tax dollars. The Granville Recreation District recognizes the Granville Exempted Village School District's product as being integral to Granville's future prosperity. The Granville Recreation District recognizes the Granville Exempted Village School District's Board of Education and administrative staff as trustworthy and qualified to determine the best means to fund the school's operations. The Granville Recreation District supports the Granville Exempted Village School District's current levy efforts. Just wanted to share that. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Oh, great. Thank you. Excellent. Anyone else who would wish to address the board?
Hi, I'm Wendy Hollinger. I just wanted to stop in and thank all the people that have taken time to speak with me in the last couple of weeks. I really appreciate it. I've spoken with Jeff Brown. Brittany took time to speak with me. I don't think it's a surprise, especially after seeing her report, why she would have been awarded that. Sounds pretty impressive, but I thank you for breaking things down, making them easy to understand, and Mr. Miller has taken quite a bit of time with me as well. So I'm just really grateful for that and grateful for the opportunity to be able to get questions answered. Also, the committees that you mentioned, myself, my personal area of expertise is curriculum, and so I've been anxiously awaiting the next meeting and look forward to attending that on Wednesday. And thanking also the financial folks, who a number of those folks have spoken with me as well and have put some of their information out online too. So I just want to continue to encourage the community to step up and try to behave as professionally as all of you guys do. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great, thank you for those that offered messages here, and I will point out that we are always open to input. The Board of Education's email addresses and phone numbers are available on the Board of Education website. The administration, Mr. Brown and Mrs. Triolo, are also equally available. If you have specific financial or district questions, they're very accessible. And I think that's a key part of this, is this ongoing two-way dialogue, so thank you. This brings us to the part of our agenda for board discussion. I'm not sure if you had a great presentation. If you want to frame anything or ask any questions to off that.
No, first of all, I apologize. Dealing with flights these days are a little challenging, so I apologize for the attire. I was going to take the time to change, but I thought I'd better just get here instead. So my apologies to everyone. Thank you very much for my colleagues who filled in. So obviously, we presented a little bit of information about some of the things that are happening right now. I think it's just an important topic to keep on the board discussion topics because it is moving every single day in a lot of different directions. And there are multiple entities running similar processes. And so it's just important to keep that strategic planning lens going. And in the context of, growth, we also have the levy that we've placed on the ballot for the renewal of the income tax. So just wanted to put those two topics on for discussion if there's anything that needs to be shared.
Thanks, and I'm really glad also to have you with your experience in growth, right? I think a lot of us here in Granville are not really accustomed to what we might be facing here in the next 5 or 10 or 20 years and things like that. The Olentangy School District went through some extreme growth, and you did a great job of helping them steer through that process and adding schools when necessary and staffing up to be able to support that. So we're fortunate to be able to have you kind of helping us out with this process.
Yeah. Thank you. I did do my time in Olentangy during a very rapid period of growth. And what I think is important to understand in the community to recognize is that planning is the best way to navigate and manage growth. And strategic planning is very important in that process. And the best way to keep ahead of growth is to think long-term. And so I think we've got that orientation on the board and in the community.
Well, I'd like to hear my board member colleagues' perspective on the levy, but I'd like to kind of start to see if any of you have been to meetings or heard things about real estate and development, or specifically relative to what's headed our way. We've done a lot of different community forums and meetings of public officials and so forth. From a growth perspective, any new news or things that you've heard recently? One thing I've heard is just continued real estate prices that are a little shocking, right? And that's something that's a little tough to get used to here in terms of the growth of the pricing and things like that. We also do have a video that Mike Smith, the county auditor, has made recently, specifically to try and address some of this concern and questions relative to real estate pricing growth. Unfortunately, we couldn't show it here this evening, but I'm sure it'll be posted on the school district website. And he does a really nice job as the county auditor explaining the reappraisal process. Next year is a triennial reappraisal, and is it 25 or 30% increase in real estate values that's expected?
Yeah, he is expecting 25 to 35%, somewhere there.
Right. So that's a pretty significant increase, and I guess if you look at the prices of houses as they're being sold and land as it's being sold, right, that seems like a big number, but fits right in with what we're kind of seeing, right? I mean, houses all over Granville and land in the township for sure are inflating very significantly, which is putting really different pressures on different parts of the community. So,
and I think it's important to recognize, one, he did the video specifically for Granville because we are a little bit unique compared to the other school districts in the county, and Brittany can probably be a little bit more coherent in what she says about how to explain it.
Yeah, so I didn't share that to muddy the water when I shared the tax rates. But basically, the concept of the 20 mil floor is what Jeff's referencing. And what that means is that in those other districts in the county, the tax rates have been adjusted down so much due to the increases in value that their total effective rate is now at 20 mils. So they're already sitting at the 20 mil floor. So in those districts, when they're looking at a 25 to 35% increase in values, they will see an increase, and those taxpayers will see an increase in their taxes, because as those values go up, the tax rate cannot be adjusted any further down below the 20 mils. So they will see growth in that reappraisal process. Yep, so Granville is unique in Licking County for that reason.
So we will not see the type of growth, even though values increase, we're still above that 20 mil floor, so we will not, the residents of Granville will not see the same type of increase magnitude. And we appreciate Mike Smith, one, having several conversations with Brittany and I for us to fully understand it, and, or at least me, she understands it. And then to his willingness to go over to GIS or GMS and do a video for us. We appreciate that, just so that we can get that factual information out there.
Great.
But with those higher prices in Granville, those higher house prices, we're going to see people with more money coming in, with more income coming in.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's important to have an income tax to support all the growth we're also going to see. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think that's one of the great perspectives about, the reason why we selected continuing things, right? If you have a lot of folks moving into the district that have higher incomes to afford the higher home values, you'd like to make sure that you have in place a tax structure that ensures sustainability, right? And doesn't risk in the future an adjustment of kind of the value about how our schools work and so forth. So that's just one of the many reasons why in putting in place a continuing levy now is important. But that's a really good point.
Well, yeah, just on that note, the idea of continuing and the role of the finance committee in that decision. I know that Brittany obviously is part of the finance committee. I know that Mr. Miller are. Can you just speak a little bit to the finance committee role in the continuing levy decision, the idea that it is continuing? Because I know that we had discussion about it, and I had discussion with constituents, but I didn't specifically have discussion with finance committee, and so I was wondering what kind of that looked like. And
Yeah, I can start that off. So at the May Finance Committee meeting, the primary basis for the meeting was the May 5-year forecast. So we typically meet around forecast times. And so obviously as part of the forecast presentation, the topic of the income tax comes up. And so individuals on the committee shared their personal perspective for their individual preference, I would say, how they personally felt. And so, as Ryan mentioned, the role of the superintendent committee isn't necessarily to vote as a committee and come up with a formal recommendation for the board. So there was no consensus or anything like that. There were, I would say, a few individuals who did express their preference not for a continuing option. But again, that I would say was their personal preference, not necessarily from a school district financial perspective, meaning they didn't look at the 5-year forecast and go, oh, in 5 years, you're not gonna have the need for this, this revenue source anymore. So it's more from their personal perspective. I don't know if anybody else wants to elaborate on that.
I just add, I think it was a really good give and take, and it was a nice discussion, and people felt, I think, comfortable discussing difference of opinions or different reasons why. I walked out of there thinking that everybody recognized the district's going to need the funds.
Yeah.
It might just be, how do we get there?
Yeah.
But it was, I think, at least from Brittany and Jeff, because it's their committees, they walked out of there and had a sense of where folks were coming from. So I think it's really important, even though there's not a formal vote or anything, what are people's concerns? What do they like about this? What's the reality? And it was a really good, honest, open discussion, and that's what I hope all these committees can do, is, and like Thomas said, encourage people to come to them.
And I think, I'm not 100% positive, but I believe that it was discussed in the May and June board meetings when you were making your decision on what level you were going to apply it. It was referenced there, that there were differing opinions.
Right.
And I think that's, ultimately, you have to make a decision and put something on the ballot. And so, but I think it is important to share constituents' feedback and then come to a decision. You're tasked with the long-term sustainability of the school district. That's your main focus. And I think what you did is put on the ballot what you believe will be the best mechanism to do that. The diversification of revenue is absolutely essential. We cannot just rely on property tax any longer. And so I think that strategy is critical for our long-term success, especially in a high-growth environment.
That's what came to my mind, is that the reason we started talking about that in the first place as a possibility was to reduce the reliance on the property tax and try to ease the burden to a certain degree on older residents. And I think you referenced earlier that Social Security is not included.
Correct.
And there are some other types of income that are not included, and we were looking for ways to make it less burdensome for long-term residents to continue to be part of the community, because we didn't want to price anybody out. So that's a big reason that we think it's so important for this to continue.
One comment, if you don't mind, that I add to that is, because I forgot to mention it earlier, too, is that the school district income tax is only on residents. So if you work in the district but do not live here, you're not subject to the tax. So in a way, I don't want to say it helps commercial or it helps business, but it doesn't. It's a way for the district to generate revenue that maybe incentivizes business in some small way, because if it weren't for this, it could be, the equivalent would be a 12-mil property tax, which would impact businesses pretty significantly. So
That's one of the challenges we have to attracting businesses, high property taxes. So this is a very intentional strategy to help commercial development, which ultimately will pay off for the rest in terms of its returns to the district.
And I think sometimes people get confused as to what our role is in terms of commercial development. And I know that previous board presidents have done a lot, working with the village, working with the township to try to increase that. And it's not always successful, but we are in favor, maybe I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I am in favor of more commercial tax to support our schools, but it's not necessarily
Our sandbox.
right.
Yes.
Thank you,
But we do have a fantastic opportunity here short term. And like Jeff was kind of alluding to, you want to plan these things. You don't want them to happen to you. And we know there's going to be a lot of commercial development in addition to residential development that happens in our area. And now is the opportunity to intentionally make plans, between townships that we're part of and the village as well and so forth, about like what kind of commercial development that we want, right? We've really not had significant commercial development, but I think there's a great opportunity. And I will say that our community organizations have really stepped up, and there's some great plans being made. I'm excited to see those come to fruition with actual, legal documents and actual dirt moving, and actual extension of utilities and things like that that's really required for that to happen. But I know there's been some great efforts recently to move that forward in a collaborative way.
Yeah, first of all, I think the framework conversation that's happening regionally is going to be advantageous for economic development. But I know the chamber is, obviously engaged in economic development, and Jim Leonard from the Neighborhood Strategies is trying to give them some strategies and tools to use to cultivate business along the 16 corridor. The village is also revising their comprehensive plan to make sure that the comprehensive plan includes an economic development lens. So all those things are absolutely critical.
And I guess I'll just talk for a second about my own kind of process in coming to the approval of this continuing levy and my support of it. Is that, 5 years ago, I was the biggest proponent of a 5-year term, right? And maybe we should have gone on permanently then, it would have been a lot easier now. But in reality, these conversations that are really difficult for communities and the school board are really important, right? And I really think this feedback mechanism is critical. It's really critical to get accountability, right? If we're not delivering a good product, right, or we're spending too much, right, this is an important public feedback mechanism for us. And voting is critical in that way. And in reality, we are going to have that opportunity as a community to vote on school district resources many times again. We saw since 1976, we've had 9 different chances to pass property tax levies because they don't go with inflation. We'll have that opportunity again. I don't know in our current forecast if it's going to be 3 years or 5 years or 6 years or what, because we don't quite know what the enrollment growth is going to be or what inflation is going to be, which are both huge factors in the cadence of property tax levies to manage inflation. So we will continue, regardless of what happens with the income tax, timing and renewal and so forth, we'll continue to be in a levy cycle. But if you compound the levy cycle every 3 to 5 or 6 years and so forth, with the renewal cycle on 20% of your revenue through the income tax, you now are going to be in front of the voters every couple of years, right? And on top of that, that will likely have broad issues. We know we're going to need new schools and things like that and so forth. So it puts a cadence that's very challenging, but more importantly, it puts a stress on such a significant part of our budget. 20% of our budget is not the kind of thing you can throw around, right? It's not a kind of lever you can pull back and forth with fees or with staffing and things. And I don't mean to threaten we're going to fire 35 teachers if this doesn't pass. That's not the reality of it, right? But the reality is to be able to plan successfully for the future, you need to have a stable base to stand on, right? And in order to be, I think, a successful school district, you need to be accountable, right? And I am proud, very proud of the results that we deliver, and I'm super proud of the financial position that we're in to do that. If you look at our expenses per student, are on par or less than our comparable districts in Central Ohio, and on par or less than our comparable districts around the state. So I'm so proud of that financial performance, not to mention the performance of our students, right? Whether it be in the official metrics or whether it be in just extracurricular activities and things like that. So I very much changed my tune in terms of supporting this continuing levy, because we know it's going to be a continuing need. We know we're going into a time of growth where instability, right, in the certainty of your revenue stream is going to limit our options in terms of being able to recruit and retain great staff, in terms of being able to fund new development projects and buildings and things like that, and impact the rates on those. So I hope that the community appreciates the value of the schools, right, the product that we deliver and the cost that we deliver it for. I really appreciate all those who've stepped up in support, but I really would ask that any community member that does continue to have questions, right, to reach out to any one of us here at the table, right, to get your questions answered, because this is an important conversation for the community, and we really appreciate the engagement.
Final word.
Yeah.
Oh,
Please.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to cut you off.
Brittany, do you remember, or Jeff, how many houses I would say are on the books to be built in the next 2 years that we know? Wasn't it like 64?
67 in yes, on River Road, 67.
So we have, we talked about, in a normal year, it's anywhere, 20 to 30? So to me, the idea of this, of the renewal, it goes to being flexible and addressing this. And I know Mr. Brown has, and to echo what other folks have said, has the experience up in Olentangy. And the last thing I want to see us do is have to buy land, but I think we have to be realistic that we might have to. And I'm not a real estate agent, I'm not a forecaster, but I really don't think land's going to get cheaper in our school district. So this gives us the ability to be prepared. And when I hear that 64 houses are coming in, and that's probably been in the works before the Intel announcement.
Yeah, it was.
So we're going to experience growth, and I think the whole Intel development, the way I look at it, is just going to accelerate that growth. I feel like Granville schools were going to grow, and I think this will accelerate it. But allowing the district to have the ability to be prepared, I think, is going to be really important to maintain the quality of education that my kids receive, that I want kids in the future, because I feel that's my responsibility, is I want them to have the same opportunities, if not more, than my 3 kids who went through it. So I feel that, it's a responsibility to be prepared. And some people might be concerned about the amount that we're carrying, but I think that gives us the flexibility of being prepared, and also helps with this levy cycle that we're still going to be in. I mean, if we're in a better cash position, then hopefully we can push that out, so it's not as, it's not as often. So I like it that it gives the school, prepares us for what is happening and what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Two things that I'd like to just kind of end on. In my 12 years in Granville, we've had 2 reduction of force. So probably the most destructive thing that can happen to the culture of a school district is reduce staff. We've done it twice because we've had to adjust and live within what we were supported on at that time. That's changed now. We have 38% less people going into the teaching profession. If we have a reduction in force, I'm very concerned that we will never get those staff members back, because there aren't going to be teachers available. So that's one of the things that I'm concerned about, because if 80% of our budget is in staff, and the income tax represents 20% of our aggregate revenue, and the pipeline is shrinking, it really does put a premium on recruitment and retention of our current staff. And we have, as many of you have referenced, phenomenal staff members. And so that's one thing that I just wanted to add to that commentary. And then, we are talking about Intel, and I think we're talking about Intel specifically, but the aggregate Intel impact is, there's going to be 30 to 50 other contractors. It's not just Intel. The entire region, and I actually think that's going to be from Marysville all the way over, because now we have a $3.5 billion EV battery plant going in there as well. We're not that far from each other in reality. So this entire central Ohio region is going to be growing and growing relatively rapidly with the influx of these opportunities for businesses. So I think in order to be nimble, in order to be able to adjust to the circumstances that are laying out, you have to have stability in funding, just like you had to have stability in leadership, and you have to have stability in staff. So all those things are absolutely critical moving forward.
Great, thank you for that. And again, if there's any community questions, we're always open to engage in those conversations.
Please. Yes. Okay, that brings us to our action agenda, right?
Indeed.
All right, so item 10.01 is our board policy adoption. We had our first reading last month. Again, all of these are recommended policies from OSBA. Most of them are legal reference updates or alignment with current practice.
Second.
Thanks for the update last month. I don't have any further questions. Thank you. Roll.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Riggle?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Okay, next is our consent agenda, 11.01A through C8.
Motion. So moved.
Second.
Okay, so I'd like to call your attention to a few things. One, the American Legion Post, 398 of Granville is purchasing a bench near the flags at the Walter J. Hodges Athletic Complex. I don't know if you've ever been to a Friday night game, but we have some American Legion people that come to raise the flag. and they need a place to sit. So they have purchased the bench, and we will install that as soon as it comes in. So we want to appreciate them
And for their regular attendance.
and their regular attendance and the service to raising the flag. Yes. Next is Granville Education Foundation. We have almost $7,000 or over $7,000 of grants for classroom grants for 2023.
Any updates on those? Anybody have any highlights from those? I'm not sure who's on the.
Ryan's on the selection committee, so Ryan,
That's one of
do
the
you want
highlights
to?
I'm pulling up right now.
Okay. But I'll go on.
There's plenty of other donations, so yeah.
Yes, we have Tanya and her department put together an OFCC safety grant and received $99,000 of funding for that grant, which is going to be primarily used for a refurbishment of our security cameras and some other software associated with our video system, so.
What was the maximum amount available for that grant? Was it 100,000?
It was 100,000.
Yeah, I wondered, it was 99,381. So
Yeah. Pretty good.
Where's the other $700?
So we appreciate Tanya and her department doing that. And then we've been in a partnership talking about self-determined learning with a couple of different districts, and we submitted a grant that Brittany will manage on behalf of this group. It's a collaborative between Westerville City Schools, Columbus City Schools, Belpre Schools, and Granville Schools. So we have urban, suburban, suburban, and then rural. And we are working with Dr. Mike Nicholson, and that grant is going to pay for not only student interactions, but also staff. So we're excited about that too.
I'm going to make a quick highlight on that one too. That's not just a financial grant of $54,000. It's really a great one culturally to contribute to our world-class education, right? And the fact that we've got a diverse group of school districts there will allow us to advocate for the kinds of solutions that we come up with through that process that is going to pay dividends for students across the state.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about what it'll do for our students, and I'm really appreciative to yourself and Mike for the work in doing that, and the fact having a grant from the Martha Holdings Jennings Foundation is wonderful to support that.
Yeah, it's full circle. When I was a kid, I used to walk in the Holden Arboretum up in Cleveland. And so it's kind of full circle. I've always appreciated their philanthropy and giving back to the community. So very excited about that. Mr. Burnett, do you have?
I do. There was a grant to start Science Olympiad at the high school, so that was a significant contribution from GEF. There was a grant to support some Spanish materials for the global language classes at GIS. There were several grants related to books and reading nooks and flexible seating kind of combined together. And another grant for books for large print for students that have difficulty reading small print that are in text as well. So that's a quick summary of what the grants were for.
That's great. Yeah, GF is a fantastic resource, and I must say at this time of year when people are considering their own charitable donations, GF is a very worthy cause along with our other booster organizations, and we appreciate the whole community's support in funding those programs that do go above and beyond and make Granville education as special as it is.
Yes, thank you. I'd also highlight the fact that we have our French foreign language students traveling to Paris in June of 2023. What we've been doing is starting to put together our 5-year plan for student travel opportunities again, so that we can bring those to parents' attention. We had to put a little bit of a hiatus on that for a couple of years, and this is an opportunity that, again, aligns with that world-class education and building global competency. It's an excellent opportunity.
And I must say, that's not a school district-funded field trip to Paris, but a parent-funded
Yes.
trip.
It is an opportunity that has a financial commitment on behalf of the student and parent. And then the last thing that I would highlight in the consent agenda is the bus driver substitute pay rate. Obviously, we are in a marketplace and we're trying to maintain a competitive edge. And we realized that our sub rates for sub bus drivers was woefully insufficient. So we're trying to put ourselves back in the market for sub-drivers. And so we're increasing that rate to $18 an hour with your approval.
Great. What were we paying? What was the rate?
15.
Okay, I'm just curious, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm sure there'll be more things in this kind of inflationary period, and we need to make adjustments as necessary, so.
Absolutely.
Any other questions on the consent agenda? No, roll please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 12.01, approval of the September 2022 financial report.
So moved. Second.
Nice job with that. That was good to see that things are kind of in line and rolling along in accordance with budget. Also, continue to appreciate your help with putting graphs and figures and things like that together in an understandable format, beyond the pure accounting kind of stuff. Appreciate that.
I really appreciate it.
Unfortunately, the entire complex funding of the school district doesn't fit on one pie chart.
Right.
Yes, please vote.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 12.02, approval of resolution to establish the Ohio K-12 Safety Grant Account and the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation Grant Account.
So moved.
Second.
The roll, please.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 12.03, approval of the permanent appropriation resolution for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
And this is to update for the two grants mentioned above and what Jeff mentioned in the consent agenda, so just have to adjust for those.
It's great to have those. Thank you for making the appropriate accounting entries.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.